The shuttle docked with a soft thump, and Kira Vasquez pressed her face against a small window. The Velantris Institute hung in space like a crown made of light. Thousands of windows glowed against the darkness. Ships moved around it like insects around a lamp. This was the most famous school in 12 star systems. The children of emperors studied here. The future leaders of entire planets walked these halls. And now, for the first time in history, a human would walk among them. Kira was 24 years old. She had grown up in Snowpole, in a small apartment where rain leaked through the ceiling. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father left when she was 6. Nobody in her family had ever left Earth before. Nobody had ever left their neighborhood, really. But Kira had a gift. Languages came to her like breathing. By the time she was 15, she spoke 9 human languages. By 20, she had taught herself 3 alien ones from intercepted broadcasts. The university called her a prodigy. The government called her an asset. The Galactic Consortium called her a curiosity. That was the word they used. Curiosity. Like she was a strange rock someone had found on the ground. The airlock opened with a hiss. Kira picked up her single bag and stepped onto the station. The first thing she noticed was how everyone towered over her. The Thrinn were insect-like creatures, nearly 3 meters tall, with hard shells that clicked when they moved. The Moraveks were made of living crystal, their bodies catching the light and throwing rainbows on the walls. The Ildrati looked almost human, but taller, thinner, with skin like pale silk and eyes that held no pupils at all. They all stopped to stare at her. Kira had expected curiosity. She had expected questions. What she got was silence. The kind of silence that falls when something unpleasant enters a clean room. Young Thrinn made a sound that her translator rendered as laughter. "They actually sent one," he said to his companion. "I thought it was a joke." Kira kept walking. She had read the reports. She knew that most species considered humans to be primitives. Clever animals, perhaps. Dangerous animals, according to some. But animals nonetheless. Earth had only made contact with galactic civilization 40 years ago. In a galaxy where some species had traveled between stars for 100,000 years, humans were newborns. Dirty, noisy, violent newborns. A Moravek's administrator met her at the welcome center. Its crystalline face showed no expression, but its voice through the translator was cold. "You are the human," it said. Not a question. "Kira Vasquez," she replied. "I was told someone would show me to my quarters." "Your quarters?" The Moraveks made a sound like glass scraping. "Yes, follow." They walked for a long time. The hallways changed as they went. First they were bright and beautiful, with windows showing the stars and artwork on the walls. Then they became plain. Then they became gray. Then they became dark. Finally, the Moraveks stopped at a small door in a section that smelled like machine oil. "Your quarters," it said, and walked away without another word. Kira opened the door. The room was tiny. A bed that was too short. A desk with a broken leg. A window that looked out at a wall of pipes. On Earth, this would be a storage closet. Here, it was a message. She sat on the bed and did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry. The next day, she went to register for her classes. The administrator told her that her academic records were under review. She could not access the library until they were verified. She could not enter the laboratories. She could not eat in the main dining hall because her biological compatibility had not been confirmed. "How long will verification take?" Kira asked. "As long as it takes," the administrator replied. She ate her meals in her room. She studied from the few books she had brought. She walked the hallways and memorized them, because there was nothing else to do. The other students ignored her. When she tried to speak to them, they walked away. When she sat in common areas, they left. She was not a person to them. She was pollution. 3 weeks passed. Her records remained under review. Then she met the headmaster. Torvex Ildrian was an Ildrati of obvious importance. His robes were white and gold. His movements were graceful and slow. When he looked at Kira, she felt something cold touch the edges of her mind. The Ildrati were psychics. They could read emotions, sense intentions, sometimes even push thoughts into other minds. The human student, Torvex said. His voice was soft and pleasant. I wanted to welcome you personally. Thank you, Headmaster, Kira said carefully. I must confess, I was the one who approved your application. He smiled. It did not reach his empty eyes. Many on the council thought it was too soon. Humans are so new to our community, so unrefined. But I believe in giving every species a chance to prove itself. Kira understood then. She understood with perfect clarity. He had brought her here to fail. She was not a student. She was a demonstration. Look at the human, unable to keep up. Look at the human, breaking under pressure. Look at the human, proving that her species was not ready for the stars. I appreciate the opportunity, Kira said. Her voice did not shake. I intend to make the most of it. I'm sure you will try. Torvex's smile widened. I'm sure you will try very hard. After he left, Kira returned to her tiny room. She sat on her too-short bed. She looked out her window at the pipes, and she began to plan. That night, she started keeping records. Every insult, every blocked request, every student who watched her with fear instead of contempt because she had noticed them too. The ones who looked away quickly, the ones who seemed afraid of more than just a human. Something was wrong at this institute. Something beyond simple racism. Kira had grown up poor in a hard city. She knew what corruption looked like. She knew what cruelty looked like when it wore expensive clothes and spoke with soft voices. Headmaster, Torvex thought he had brought a primitive to his station, a simple creature to break and display. He had not read enough about Earth. He did not know what humans did when they were trapped. He did not know about their history of survival against impossible odds. He did not know that the same species that created art and music had also created 1,000 ways to destroy their enemies. Kira pulled out her tablet and began to write. Day 1. She typed, They want me to fail. They want me to break. They do not know me. They do not know my people. They will learn. 3 months passed. Kira learned to survive. She found ways around the blocks on her education. When they denied her library access, she listened outside lecture halls and memorized what she heard. When they refused her laboratory time, she built small experiments in her maintenance closet room using broken equipment she found in trash disposal areas. When students refused to speak with her, she watched them instead. She learned their habits, their schedules, their secrets. She also learned about the station itself. The Valentris Institute was old. Very old. It had been built over centuries, layer upon layer, like a tree growing new rings. The newest sections were beautiful and modern. But underneath, in the deep places where Kira's room was located, the station was ancient. Dark hallways led to forgotten sections. Old systems still hummed with power that nobody monitored. Kira explored these places during the night hours when the station slept. She found maintenance tunnels that connected distant sections. She found old computer terminals that still worked but had been forgotten by security systems. She found rooms that had not been opened in decades. She mapped everything. She memorized everything. Just in case. During the days, she played the role they expected. The struggling human. The primitive trying to keep up. She made sure to look tired. She made sure to seem beaten. Let them think they were winning. But she also watched the students who seemed afraid. There were 7 of them. Young ones, mostly. A Thrin female whose shell had a crack that never healed right. A Moravex whose crystal had clouded patches like bruises. 2 Ildrati siblings who flinched whenever an authority figure spoke to them. These students had something in common. They had no powerful families. They had won their places through talent alone. They had no one to protect them. Just like Kira, on the night everything changed. Kira was returning from one of her exploration trips. She was thinking about a conversation she had overheard between 2 administrators. Something about processing and the usual arrangements. She opened her door and stopped. Her room had been searched. Everything she owned was scattered across the floor. Her clothes, her books, her precious tablets with all her notes, and sitting on her bed, glowing softly in the dim light, was a Moravex memory crystal. Kira's blood went cold. She knew what this was. Memory crystals held the recorded experiences of dead Moravex. They were sacred objects, more valuable than anything humans had. Stealing one was not just theft. It was desecration. The punishment was neural binding, a process that would lock her mind into a state of permanent obedience. Her body would be sold to whoever wanted a human servant. Her thoughts would no longer be her own. She did not touch the crystal. She did not move. The door behind her opened. Headmaster Torvex stood there with 4 security officers, his empty eyes bright with satisfaction. "We received a report," he said softly. "Concerned students noticed you behaving suspiciously. And now we find this." "I did not take this," Kira said. Her voice was steady. "Someone put it here. Of course you would say that." Torvex's smile was gentle, almost kind. The primitive creature caught in her crime claims innocence. How predictable. The trial took place the next morning. It lasted 20 minutes. Kira was not allowed to speak in her own defense. Her appointed advocate, a young Ildrati who could not meet her eyes, said nothing at all. When she tried to present the surveillance data she had been gathering, data that could prove she was nowhere near the storage area when the crystal was stolen, her files had been erased. Every backup, every copy, almost every copy. The Council of Judges did not deliberate. They had already decided before the trial began. Headmaster Torvex read the sentence himself, his voice filled with false regret. For the crime of sacred theft, the human known as Kira Vasquez is sentenced to neural binding. The procedure will be conducted tomorrow at midday. May this serve as a lesson about the dangers of allowing primitives into civilized spaces. They took her to a holding cell in the oldest part of the station. The deep core, they called it. A place where the walls were thick and the corridors were empty. A place where no one could hear anything. The guards locked her in and left. Their footsteps faded into silence. Kira sat in the darkness for exactly 3 minutes. She was not thinking about escape. She was not panicking. She was counting Dodd. She had been counting since her first week at the Institute. Counting patrol intervals. Counting the seconds between power fluctuations in the old sections. Counting the heartbeats between each guard rotation. She had known this moment might come. Not the details, but the shape of it. She had known they would eventually move against her. Predators always did. When their prey refused to simply die. The difference was that Kira had prepared. She reached behind her ear and removed her translation implant. It was a standard device given to all students. But Kira had spent dozens of sleepless nights modifying hers. It was no longer just a translator. It was a key, a weapon, a message in a bottle. The lights in her cell flickered. In the old sections, they did this every 37 minutes when the ancient power systems were cycled. 17 seconds of darkness. Kira had 17 seconds. She moved up by the time the lights came back. The lock on her cell door was open. The corridor outside was empty. The station security systems in this forgotten section had not been updated in 50 years. They did not know she had escaped Kira walked into the darkness of the deep core. She had work to do. Tomorrow at midday, they expected to bind her mind and sell her body. Tomorrow at midday, they would learn what happens when you trap an Earthborn human. They would learn the hard way. The ceremony hall was full. Representatives from every major species had gathered to witness the binding of the human thief. This was an event. This was entertainment. This was proof that humanity did not belong among the stars. Headmaster Torvex stood at the center of the stage, his white robes catching the light. The neural binding device sat beside him, a crown of wires and crystals that would forever end Kira Vasquez's existence as a free being. The guards brought out an empty restraint chair. Torvex's smile froze before anyone could speak. Every screen in the station flickered. The lights dimmed, and a face appeared on every display surface in the Institute. Kira Vasquez looked out at thousands of viewers. Her face was bruised. Her hair was tangled, but her eyes were clear and sharp like a blade in the darkness. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm. "I apologize for interrupting your ceremony. I know you were all looking forward to watching my mind be destroyed, but I have a presentation to share first." Torvex screamed for his technicians to cut the broadcast. They tried. They failed. Kira had spent 3 months learning the station systems. She knew where the old cables connected to the new. She knew which junction boxes controlled which sections. She had been preparing for this moment since her second week. "I want to talk about disappearances," Kira continued. "Over the past 60 years, 47 students have vanished from this institute. They were all scholarship students. They all came from weak families. They all had no one to protect them." She paused. The official records say they were expelled for various reasons: theft, violence, cheating. But I found other records. Hidden records. The real records. Files appeared on the screens. Financial transfers. Communication logs. Shipping manifests. Headmaster Torvex has been running a trafficking operation. He frames vulnerable students for crimes they did not commit. He binds their minds, and then he sells them. Servants, workers, worse. Kira's voice remained steady. The Moravec's memory crystal found in my room was stolen by a black market dealer named Vos Kethrian. Here are the messages between him and the headmaster. Here are the payments. Here is the truth. The hall erupted into chaos. The Moravec's delegation went completely still, their crystal bodies darkening with rage. Their sacred object had not been stolen by a human. It had been stolen by the man who was supposed to protect their students. But Torvex was not finished. He raised his hand, and a squad of enhanced Thrin warriors pushed through the crowd. These were not regular guards. These were his personal soldiers, bought and paid for over decades of stolen wealth. "Find her," Torvex commanded. His voice had lost its softness. "Find her and kill her. Destroy every terminal she could have used." Now, the warriors moved. They were fast, brutal, and experienced. They spread through the station in organized patterns, checking every section, every corridor, every room. They found Kira's broadcast location in minutes. An old communications hub in the deep core, exactly where they expected. It was empty. The equipment was still running, but the human was gone. What they did not expect was the trap. The first warrior entered the room and stepped on a pressure plate Kira had installed the night before. A panel in the ceiling opened and dropped 300 kilograms of old machinery directly onto his shell. He went down screaming. The others learned to be careful. But careful was slow, and slow gave Kira time. She moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost. She had memorized every path, every junction, every hiding spot. The Thrin were larger and stronger and faster in open spaces. But in tight corridors and narrow shafts, size was a disadvantage. She led them into section after section she had prepared. In one corridor, she had weakened the floor panels. A warrior stepped through and fell 2 levels, shattering his legs. In another section, she had rigged the atmospheric controls. When 3 warriors followed her in, she sealed the doors and vented the oxygen. They survived, but by the time they broke out, she was gone. In the old observation deck, she had disabled the gravity generators. A warrior who chased her there found himself floating helplessly while she pushed off walls and disappeared through a hatch. She was not stronger than them. She was not faster. She was not better armed, but she was human. Humans had evolved on a death world, a planet of earthquakes and hurricanes and ice ages and predators with teeth and claws. For 100,000 years, they had survived by thinking, by planning, by refusing to accept that death was certain. When you trapped a human, they did not give up. They did not wait to be killed. They fought with everything they had, and everything they could find, and everything they could imagine. After 4 hours, Torvex had lost 12 warriors. 4 were dead. 8 were injured badly enough to be useless. The remaining 6 were afraid. They had hunted criminals before. They had killed rebels and crushed resistance fighters. They had never hunted anything like this. Kira watched them from a ventilation shaft above a corridor. She was exhausted. Her body hurt in a dozen places. She had a cut above her eye that would not stop bleeding, but she was alive. And her message had been delivered. Even now, copies of her evidence were spreading through the station's network, through communication systems, through channels that Torvex could not control. The truth was loose. He could kill her, but he could not kill the truth. She smiled in the darkness. Now it was time for the final lesson. The old observation deck was the most beautiful place on the station. It had been built first, centuries ago, before all the additions and expansions. A great dome of transparent material looked out at the stars. Ancient seats, dusty but elegant, faced the window. Once, this had been where the founders of the Institute came to think and dream. Now it was where Kira Vasquez would make her final stand. She had let them find her. She had left just enough of a trail, just enough of a hint. The remaining warriors followed it, and Headmaster Torvex followed them. He wanted to see her die personally. They found her standing at the center of the dome, looking out at the stars. Her hands were empty. Her body was bruised and bleeding. She looked small and tired and alone. Torvex smiled as his warriors spread out to surround her. "You caused a great deal of trouble," he said. His voice was soft again, controlled again. "I admit I am impressed. For a primitive, you showed remarkable creativity." "Thank you," Kira said. She did not turn around. That means a lot coming from a slaver and a murderer. The warriors raised their weapons. 6 of them in a circle. There was no escape. "Your evidence will be dismissed," Torvex continued. "I have friends on every council. I have spent decades building power. By tomorrow, the story will be that a desperate human criminal created false documents to save herself. You will be dead, and everything will return to normal." "Maybe," Kira said. "But I don't think so. And why is that?" Now she turned. Her eyes met his empty ones without fear. "Because you're about to learn something about humans. Something your species never understood." Torvex laughed. It was a gentle sound, almost kind. "What could you possibly teach me, child? I have lived for 300 years. I have walked through the minds of thousands. I have seen everything that sentient beings can think and feel and dream. Have you ever walked through a human mind?" The question made him pause. In truth, he had not. Humans were new to the galaxy. They were considered too primitive to bother with. The Ildrati psychics had studied them from a distance, but actual mental contact was rare. I will show you something, Kira said. And then we can discuss surrender. Torvex's pride would not let him refuse. He was the most powerful psychic in the Institute. This small creature was offering to let him into her mind. It would be easy. It would be satisfying. He would show her what true mental domination felt like before his warriors killed her. He reached out with his thoughts. He pushed against her consciousness. He expected to find simple patterns, basic emotions, the crude architecture of a primitive brain. What he found was a storm. Human minds were not orderly. They were not calm. They were chaos given form. 100,000 years of survival had shaped them into something that no Ildrati had ever imagined. Fear was there, yes, but fear that had been hammered into determination over countless generations. Pain was there, but pain transformed into anger, into spite, into a burning refusal to surrender. And beneath it all, something the Ildrati did not have. Something they had evolved past millions of years ago. Humans called it fight or flight. But that was too simple. It was deeper, older. It was the thing that made a human mother lift a vehicle off her child. The thing that made a human soldier hold a position when all logic said to run. The thing that made a human being claw at survival even when there was no hope at all. Torvex had touched minds that wanted to live. He had never touched. A mind that refused to die. The psychic backlash hit him like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his nose bleeding silver, his eyes wide with something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. His warriors hesitated. They had never seen their master in pain. They had never seen him afraid. In that moment of hesitation, Kira spoke. Here is the situation, she said. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who had already made peace with death and moved past it. I have copies of my evidence in 17 locations across the station's network. If I die, they release automatically. If my heart stops, they release. If I fail to enter a code every 6 hours, they release. You cannot find them all in time. You cannot stop them. Torvex wiped the silver blood from his face. His hands were shaking. What do you want? I want you to surrender yourself to the Coalition representatives who are currently gathering in the main hall. I want you to confess to your crimes. I want the locations of every student you sold. You're insane. I would rather die than die. Kira shrugged. But your legacy dies with you. Your family name becomes a symbol of slavery and corruption. Everything you built becomes proof of your evil. Your species will speak your name as a curse for the next 1,000 years. She stepped closer. The warriors did not shoot. They were watching Torvex, waiting for orders. Or you can surrender. You can spend your remaining centuries in prison. Your crimes will still be known, but you will have the chance to provide information, to help find the victims, to earn some small measure of redemption. You would give me that chance? After everything? Kira's eyes were cold and ancient, the eyes of a species that had learned mercy only after learning every possible form of cruelty. Humans don't just destroy their enemies, she said. We give them the opportunity to become less terrible. It's inefficient. It's often foolish. But it's who we are. She held out her hand. Choose, Headmaster. Death and eternal shame, or life and the possibility of something better. You have 30 seconds. The warriors looked at each other. They looked at their broken master. They looked at the small human who had beaten them all. Torvex looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. The teaching was complete. The days after Torvex's arrest moved quickly. Like water finally released from behind a dam. Coalition investigators arrived within hours. They were a mixed group, representatives from every major species, none of them friends of the fallen headmaster. They found the hidden records that Kira had discovered and much more besides. Decades of crimes. Hundreds of victims. A network of buyers and sellers that stretched across 6 star systems. The former students were found. Some of them had been slaves for 50 years. Their minds were damaged, broken by the binding process. But the Ildrati healers said that with time and care, some recovery was possible. It would take years. It would take patience. But there was hope. The Moravec's delegation recovered their memory crystal. They held a ceremony to honor it, and they invited Kira to attend. She stood among the crystal beings as they sang frequencies that humans could not hear. And she felt something warm brush against her mind. Gratitude, respect, an apology that needed no words. The 7 frightened students Kira had noticed in her first months came to see her. They had been next on Torvex's list. They had known something was wrong, but had been too afraid to speak. Now they stood in her doorway, uncertain, ashamed, grateful. "How did you know?" the Thrin female asked. Her cracked shell seemed less painful somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. "I grew up in a place where predators wore nice clothes," Kira said. "You learn to recognize the fear they leave behind." The Institute offered Kira full academic reinstatement. They offered an apology from the remaining council. They offered her the finest quarters on the station, with windows that looked out at the stars instead of pipes. She accepted the reinstatement. She accepted the quarters. The apology she politely declined. Words from institutions mean nothing, she explained to the confused council members. What matters is what you do next. Change your systems. Protect your vulnerable students. Watch for the next predator, because there is always a next one. That is how you apologize. The council members shifted uncomfortably. They were not used to being lectured by someone so young. They were certainly not used to being lectured by a human. But they listened. And in the weeks that followed, they began to change. The real impact, though, spread far beyond the Valentris Institute. News of what had happened traveled through every communication network in the galaxy. A human student had been trapped, framed, and sentenced to mind death. She had escaped, exposed a decades-old conspiracy, brought down one of the most powerful figures in galactic education, and done it all without killing a single person who didn't need to die, on 1,000 worlds. Beings who had dismissed humans as primitives started to pay attention. Diplomats requested meetings. Intelligence services updated their files. Military planners added new sections to their strategic assessments. Scholars wrote papers about human psychology, trying to understand how such a young species could produce someone like Kira Vasquez. The conclusions varied. Some said humans were lucky. Some said they were dangerous. Some said they were a threat that needed to be contained before they grew too powerful. But one conclusion appeared in almost every analysis, stated in different ways, but always meaning the same thing. Do not trap humans. Do not corner them. Do not give them nothing to lose, because when you do, they do not break. They adapt. They plan. They turn your strengths into weaknesses and your prisons into weapons. They find allies among your victims. They fight with creativity that borders on madness. And they remember. They remember everything, and they teach their children, and their children teach their children. The Earthborn were not strong like the Thrin. They were not elegant like the Ildrati. They were not ancient like the Moravecs, but they were survivors. They had clawed their way to intelligence on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had built civilizations from nothing and rebuilt them when they fell. They had looked up at the stars when they were still living in caves and decided, somehow, that they belonged up there, and now they were here, in her new quarters, with her new window looking out at the stars. Kira wrote a letter to her mother in Snowpalo. She described the station. She described her classes, which she was finally allowed to attend. She described the new friends she was making, cautiously, carefully, the way humans always made friends with former enemies. Then she opened a different file. There were 17 other human exchange students scattered across galactic space. She had found their records during her investigation. All of them were facing difficulties at their institutions. All of them were being pressured, isolated, set up to fail. The galaxy thought it was testing humanity. One student at a time. One failure at a time, that it did not understand that humans talk to each other. It did not understand that humans shared information, pooled resources, organized. It did not understand that the same instinct that made one human fight alone made a group of humans fight together. Watching each other's backs, covering each other's weaknesses, Kira began to type. Hello, my name is Kira Vasquez. You don't know me, but I know you. I know what you're going through. I know how alone you feel. I am writing to tell you that you are not alone. I am writing to tell you that you have family out here among the stars. She attached files, instructions, techniques, everything she had learned in her months at the Institute. How to survive, how to watch, how to prepare, how to fight back when the time came. And she added one final note. They think they are trapping us one at a time. They think we are alone. They do not understand humans. We are never alone. She sent the message. Then she turned to look out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 17 young humans were struggling, just like she had struggled. Soon they would know that someone was watching. Someone was ready to help. Someone had walked this path before them. The galaxy had tried to teach humanity a lesson about knowing their place. Humanity had taught them something else entirely. You don't trap one human. You give their entire species a reason to pay attention. And once humans paid attention, they never, ever stopped. Outside her window, the stars burned cold and bright. The galaxy stretched out in all directions, vast and ancient and full of beings who had not yet learned what Earth's children could do. Kira smiled and got back to work. There was so much left to teach.